the Christmas star shows up in the world at a time when the world was pretty dark. You have all of these political and social things that are taking place where people had lost confidence in their fellow man. You have King Herod running around, and this guy he's a sociopath leader, and he's pretty erratic, and that's kind of created a damper on things. Inflation is out of control. People are wondering about, there's food scarcity. That's a real thing at this moment when this star shows up in the sky at heaven. There seemed to just be darkness because taxes were so deceitful, and you didn't know who you could trust with information, who you couldn't trust, who you could bring in, and there was just general suspicion and corruption, and the world was dark. I think we've experienced a little bit of this, and religion has kind of followed this to a certain degree. Following 9/11, September 11th, when we find this in our country, as we look at this, our view of faith in this country started to diminish because our view of religion was largely to blame as they looked at this sociologically for the attacks of 9/11. And so the suspicion of religion begins to start to grow on September 11th. Now, immediately, Christianity in that began to see this huge spike as people returned to church immediately after those attacks, and churches for about almost 2 months were literally packed as people were like, oh man, what a wake-up call. What an opportunity for us to come and worship and take a knee, and I need to get my heart and my life back right for Christ, and all this began to be really, really high and popular at that season. Some of you remember that vividly. But then it began to wane. And there was a suspicion that began to grow. There was an underlying thing that begins to brew up, and there's a new breed of atheism that begins to sort of germinate in the soil of post-9/11. And this new breed of atheism was largely driven by rationalism and rationality, and it continues to spread to 2008, and we have the collapse of the markets in 2008, and that begins to go and continues to kind of progress. And you have guys like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, some really brilliant minds who are atheist thinkers who begin to try to push on this existence of God and begin to push on this with rationality. And religion in our country had kind of gone stale. Then we enter into the last presidential election, and I don't know if you guys remember COVID when that happened? Yep. Oh yeah, okay, so that wasn't that. Okay, so we're on the same page for that one. And so we look at this, and what happens is we realize that this rationality of life, that thinking that new atheism brought post 9/11 starts to grow stale. And we're in this kind of weird spot where this rationality has only taken us so far, because rationality can kind of explain some of the how of why you and I exist, but it's never been able to answer the question of why, which always is when we come out of seasons like a 9/11 and a financial collapse and a pandemic and just general mistrust and distrust in our political system. The thing that you and I begin to yearn for and long for is hope. Hope. And rationality can't get us there. Because what it leads us to is kind of like blind hope, or I hope and hope, or wishful thinking, or, good vibes. Oh, that's fun, isn't it? Weren't you glad somebody gave you some good vibes the other day or something like that? You're like, thanks, that'll really help me out. And so what happens is there begins to be this excuse that begins to grow up. So while rationality begins to grow on one hand with the new atheism, another breed of religion shows up, which is excuse religion. Oh, I would, but we have this thing, or I got this thing, and an excuse begins to go up. And so what happens is I would begin to grab onto this thing called faith, particularly for us, Christianity, but excusism shows up, which means I would, but here's the list of things that I have to do. And so we've productivity to ourselves to a place where we've excused ourselves into our lack of faith and trust in God. And so when we begin to look at this, excusism is driven largely by convenience. When it's convenient for me, then I'll lean in, but when it's not convenient, I'm not. So we have these two systems that have been at play for almost not quite 2 decades, but we're well on our way. kind of excusism and rationality, which is kind of a new atheism. It's not the old hard line that we begin to go with this. But what we experience in the byproduct of all this thinking and wondering and questioning is that without Christianity, the world becomes the world just becomes darker. So when we start reading the Gospels and we head into this season of Christmas and we begin to open up and maybe you like Luke and you like Luke because Luke talks about angels and he talks about angels talking to Mary and saying, hey, you're going to be with child. And the angel comes, Gabriel comes and talks to Mary and you like that. And you like when he talks to Gabriel and then also the angel goes and talks to the shepherds. And so this begins to paint a picture of this nativity begins to be born. Others of you will flip over and you'll go to, Matthew. And Matthew talks about the wise men, and they begin to enter in, and there's this star that begins to show. But what we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks, and we're going to continue next Sunday as well, on Christmas Eve, is that John does not start his story there. John saw that. He was aware of that. He was with them. But John's an old man, and now all the other disciples are believed at this point by scholars to have already died, most of them killed. John's seen the destruction of the temple. John's seen when the star showed up, things were dark. When John is an old man, things are worse. He was there at when Jesus was crucified. He was there at the resurrection. He reminds us how fast he was when he got to the tomb that day. And he paints this picture, and John begins to go up to the system, and the temple is gone. Taxes were insane. Now they're whatever the next level of insane is. They're beyond that. We have this post-Jesus era where Herod has now gone. Rome has come in and taken over everything. Nero is there, and he is slaughtering thousands of people by the day. He's crucifying people along the roads in Rome, and he's lighting them on fire at night while they're crucifying, and that's the street lamp system. And John's looking at all this, and John begins his story, and he says, I know it's Christmas, and I know everybody wants to start with how Jesus started. How did Jesus start? And I've spent so many time, I've traveled so much with Mary, and I know all the stories of Mary, but here's what you need to know, because the world is so dark. And he starts his story of Christmas, of Jesus coming into the world, with this. He says, you guys just need to remember that in the beginning was the Word. Were there shepherds? Yeah. Were there wise men? Yeah. Were there angels? Mm-hmm. Was it a virgin birth? Do you really believe that? Yeah. So Joseph just went along? Mm-hmm. He's a good guy. But in the beginning was the Word. And you need to know this. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light. And it was the light of all mankind, even the people that disagree with one another, even the people you don't like, even the Romans. That light was even available to Herod. That light's available to Nero and all of his henchmen. That light is available for those who came and burned down the temple, who destroyed our friends, our relatives, the other disciples. That light's available for all mankind. And the light shines not just the darkness. John was talking specifically, the light shines in this darkness. And the darkness has not overcome it. And John has this way of saying, like, hey, beloved, my beloved, the world doesn't look good right now. Our world doesn't look good right now, and it's our responsibility to not just point to the light, share the light, reflect the light, and that light is essential to our living. And the fascinating thing for me is we've actually seen this at Gathering Point very recently. And we talk about it all the time here. If you're a regular attender, this is not news to you. But at the end of every service, we started over a year ago, maybe two, we started with prayer. We put these stations around the room. We have crosses and candles and communion and all around the room. And you started writing prayer requests on these crosses. And the first week that you guys started writing and sharing your prayer requests, and we said we would pray with you, and we have consistently for there. The first email, I think it was like 4 or 5 pages in an email of prayer requests that you wrote down, and we partnered with you in on prayer. And I got to be honest, the first time that happened, I thought, well, yeah, first time. Then it happened again the next week, and I was like, well, yeah, but it's going to subside. And it hasn't. And you've been so faithful to say, Heavenly Father, here's the situation in my life. These are my concerns. Some of it's health, some of it's job, some of it's relationship, some of it is, it's just literally some of it's finances, some of it's housing. Some of you have gone through unbelievable tragedy. Some of you in the diseases and the pregnancies. All of this is just, I get it. It's been a lot for you. But you've been faithful to stick with it. And we've noticed now over even just the last couple weeks, there's been a new trend that emerges. And some of you have started sharing. We didn't ask you to. You just started doing it, and it's perfectly fine. Some of you have started sharing answered prayer. Thanks for praying with this. This is how this situation changed. Some of you have said, I've changed. Maybe your situation didn't change, but something changed in you, and now you see your situation differently. Some of you have had situations that have changed radically. Some of you have changed different marginally. Some of you have gone through different things, and you've just saying, hey, thanks for praying. And you begin to document the fact that when you begin to humble yourself and you begin to rely on God in these moments, there's been something that's taken place in your why. And we've seen this. And it's been so humbling as you've been staying faithful and you've been staying purposeful and you've been intentional and you've been so regular at prayer. And I know it can be hard at sometimes. Most of the time it can be really hard. Sometimes you close your eyes and go, am I even talking to somebody? Is this even did we just make this all up? And I understand that what we've experienced culturally the last 20 years, I completely come up with that. That is consistent with how we've been processing things as a culture. But what we're now seeing emerging, and we're seeing it here, in humility and excitement, is that the light is shining. And to talk about a culture being dark, that's one thing. But when you personally go through a dark season, that's a whole nother animal, isn't it? Because it's the continuation when you begin to see that light flicker in a situation or a relationship or a job or a finance or a disease, and there just begins to be a little flicker of light. And so John says that's why Jesus came into this world. And the manger, the nativity, yes, it was humble. But don't miss what Jesus did. He brought light into our world. His birth was light. His growing up was light. And why did the world need light? The world needs light because we tend to have this tendency. We have this tendency as human beings to default to darkness. We default to darkness. My kids are past the age where they're afraid of the dark, but I remember when they were little and, they would, you go in and wake up your kids back when that was like a thing for us. You go wake up their kids and they'd have their head over the covers because the light was up and you're like, hey, you need to get up. And they would cover their eyes and they'd be like, it's too bright. Or you turn the light on them in the morning and like, hey, time to get up because, we get 4 hours of sunshine right now at this time of year. And so, beyond that, you go in and you hit the light on, and they're like, and they, yell and scream and put their head under the pillow. Why is that? Well, because we default to darkness over time. We default to what is natural. Our eyes adjust to the level that we have. When you walk out of this room, not so much that way, but if you walk out of this service today and you head out that door, now it's kind of drizzly today, but some days when it's sunny, I've seen people it's dramatic, right? And you're like, oh my goodness, right? Why is that? We default. Our eyes default, our living defaults to the level, and we normalize whatever level of light, and we make that consistent, and we find that to be okay. And Jesus jumps in the middle of this thinking in John chapter 14. And I think this is just one of those things that I think is so brilliant. And when you begin to study, some of you are casual right now following Jesus, and I get this, but when you begin to kind of read and make Bible reading a part of your regular daily life kind of thing that begins to take place, you'll begin to see something transform in you where this becomes not just like, what's the verse of the day? Oh, yeah, great. What was the verse of the day? I don't know. I read it, though, so it's good. So it begins to be something where you go, Jesus is brilliant when he begins to explain this, but you don't get the brilliance on just casual. You got to dive into this. And so in John 14, he explains this phenomenon that when those doors open, we go, what happened? I didn't know. I didn't know it could be so light. John chapter 14 says, do not let your hearts be troubled. By the level of light that you find in your world, you believe in God and believe also in me, because my Father's house has many rooms. And if that were not so, if that weren't true, I would have told you. But I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. And do you know the way? Do you know how to get there? To the place where I'm going? Thomas asked like the same question that Moses asked God right before the whole Ten Commandments thing. He's like, hey, that's great, but how am I going to tell people like, that you're real, like all this kind of thing? Thomas asked a great question, the doubter. He said to him, Lord, here's the thing. We don't know where you're going. I mean, we're glad you came. And the light, love it, great speech, love to talk, so practical, it's great. But if we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way, where to go, how to get there, way to live? And Jesus answered them, he goes, let me simplify that for you. I'm the way. Oh. And the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father except through me. And if you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. And Jesus says this phrase multiple times. He says, I am the way, which doesn't make sense to us because we ask the question, which is the way? What is the way? How do I get there? What do I need to put into my phone so I have the correct step-by-step instructions to get this? Whether it's a recipe or driving to a new place, we want to have it spelled out clearly. And multiple times Jesus says this answer, I am the way. And we all go, no, what is the way? Where is the way? And Jesus goes, I am the way. Now, this obviously means Jesus is not talking about a destination. He is talking about heaven, but he's not talking about step-by-step instructions. It's not an answer. It's not a piece of data that we write down, put in our phone, and follow every day, because it won't give us. When Jesus says, I am the way, that does not help you figure out who you're going to get those last people on your list an item for Christmas. Jesus, help me. I am the way. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to get them. It doesn't give you opportunities for your relationship with your coworker that's just bad. Or maybe you have a relationship with a neighbor that's just awkward. And you're like, God, what do I do with this? And Jesus says, well, I am the way. Yeah, so I don't really see how that's helpful. I mean, what do you do that? I mean, you got a coworker that's annoying. I am the way. Okay. So I just go the opposite way? I don't understand. What do I do? It won't tell you how long your job will last or how long, the inflation, what percentage that will go, because Jesus wants to teach us something on the journey. And if you've ever looked at your life and you've wondered, where's God, right? Have you ever had those moments? You have. You just maybe haven't said it out loud. Where's God? You've wondered, where's God in this thing? And not where's God, and then an address. The question is, where's God at right now in my life, in my situation, in my circumstances? And some of you have wondered, we sure do talk about this God a lot, and we sing about him, and he occupies a lot of time. But how do we, has anyone heard from him lately? Does anybody know what he's been up to and what he's been doing? Because some of you have been on a spiritual dry spell. Some of you are like, you got prayer requests and they've answered and you're elated, and others of you are like, yeah, it's been a minute. And so if God's at work, shouldn't we be seeing him more often around? And so it's our human nature to follow someone. We want to see them and see that they're real and walking with him. So I want to continue the passage that we are, because these people that are talking about this, they're walking with Jesus literally, physically. He says, I'm the way, and they're following. So which town are we going to? They're following. I'm the way. And this is how this continues. I'm going to back up to verse 6, and then we're going to keep going. And Jesus answered them. Remember, he gave us his very, very clear, articulate, step-by-step instructions when he says, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And then he says, if you really know me, you will know me, my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. And Philip said, Lord, great speech, but can you show us the Father? And I think if we could see him, that would give us the confidence to continue on. And that'll be enough. That'll be enough for us. And Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip? Philip, don't you know me? Even after I've been among you for such a long time, anyone who has seen me, Jesus, has seen the Father. So how do you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? And the words that I say to you, I do not speak of my own authority. Rather, it is the Father who lives in me. He says, God lives in me. Who is doing his work? Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. And so we say, no. I don't, that's great that he lives in me, but I want to see him. And the disciples go, yeah. We want to see God. We want to see him. And then, man, we'll do whatever. And Jesus says, if you see me and if you know me, you've seen the same. The Apostle Paul, chimes in on this very thing that John talks about. And the Apostle Paul talks about this when he says in Galatians 2:20, he says, look, I have been crucified with Christ. The Apostle Paul says, my life, my yearnings, my longings, my lifestyle, it's all being crucified with Christ. Not physically on a cross, but spiritually. And he says, but it's Christ who lives me, and the life I live now on my own in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And the implication on this is simple. It's complicated too, but it's simple. Christ can live in you. Live in you, live in me. And if Christ lives in you and Christ lives in me, then there should be stories that are circulating about what Christ has done recently. And those stories are starting to emerge. We listened to another one this morning through the baptism. It was just awesome. Connor, thanks so much. And we have a good idea of what God's up to when we see this, because when you invite Christ into your life and I invite Christ into my life, then when we gather, Christ shows up. He shows up in the way that we treat one another. He shows up in the way that we talk to one another. He shows up in the way that we get frustrated with one another. He shows up in the way that we spend our money. It shows up in the way that we work. It shows up in the ways that we do our general, normal, Monday living over and over and over. And when we begin to live in the way that Jesus has called us to, the light shows up. Our world becomes less dark. And our community should be brighter. Because you and I are shining the light. Because we have been called to, shine the light. We have been called to be the light. We have been called to go into our community to be the light because of what Christ is doing in us and through us. And we're on a journey right now. Our journey is our life, and we live on the journey, and we're on a journey to Christmas. How do we know we're on a journey to Christmas? Because people ask, how much longer? That's how you know we're on a journey. Someone goes, are we there yet? Is it almost time? How many more days? How many more hours? That's when you know you're on a journey. And you and I struggle on journeys, especially life, because we want to know, we want answers to practical questions like, well, if my kids would just, Or if my spouse would, then I would. Or if we had a new, and if we could just pay for this, or if we get out of this, or if we could go on this trip or go on this vacation. And yet Jesus is coming to us and he says, look, I am the light. I want to live in you, and you are to be the light. And the way that the light shines is in the most mundane and ordinary things. So when you get up, and I know every day you do it the same way, and you have a routine, your routine's your way, and you drive to work the same way, and you eat the same thing for breakfast, right? And you go to bed almost at the same time, and you watch the same shows. You have these routines, and he goes, this is the place in where Jesus shows up. This is the place where we just trust God in the mundane. And then when we find ourselves in challenge, we've already developed a rhythm, a cadence for Christ to begin to go. And Jesus says, I am the way. And you're going, yeah, but do I turn right or do I go left? Do I choose this option or this option? Do I buy this or buy that? And Jesus said, I am the way. And it's more like a compass rather than a GPS. He says, my Father has prepared a place for you. It's there. You want to know, what do I do on Tuesday? And should I do this on Wednesday? And should I go to college, or should I get a career? What should I do? Do I get another certification? What do I do? And Jesus goes, no. You need to get your eyes up and remind that Christ lives in you, and you're to be the light, and you're to focus here. You need a better vision of not heaven, but just of eternity. And you live in a direction because Jesus is the way. It tells you the way to live. The way. Which is why we've gone through this whole thing of talking about being made for more. And he goes, what do you mean being made for more? The way that you're light, it means it looks like being more kind and more gentle, more patience, more peace, more self-control. And the reality that Christ is living in you in such a way where you are the light, you know that you have become the light and Jesus is shining through you, when being like patient, kindness, peace, all those things are no longer things on your to-do list. You know, when it stops being like, oh gosh, I should have been more patient today. But instead, you're just more patient. Why? Because Christ is changing you. Oh, I should be more peaceful. You're just peaceful. Because then you're not living for a to-do list. What happens is those are byproducts of your life. The more Jesus you put in you, the more fruits of the Spirit, peace, patience, kindness, love, gentleness, self-control, kindness, all that is now a byproduct of your life. It's not a to-do list. Making it a to-do list is hard. You know what happens to to-do lists for me? I forget half of them till later. Are you like me? Do you go to the store and show up and you get the 2 things you remembered and go, there's the third thing. I can't remember what it was. And then when you get home, what happens? Dadgummit, I knew it. So list living isn't going to get us there. This is a transition from list living into, these are the things that begin to be a byproduct of our life. This is the way that we become the light. And the light looks like for us as we move into this last, final week before Christmas. The life looks like starting the day, slowing down. I can't start the day slowing down. Then you're probably going to have to get up earlier. The day looks like finding time over the next few weeks of sitting down and having intentional conversations with family and friends. Not on devices, like real conversations with family and friends. You might look at being intentional in the moment of going, oh man, I know I got this family member coming up. I know I got this coworker. I know I got this Christmas party. I know it's all coming up. And I know I'm going to predetermine that I'm going to be kind to this person even though I don't want to. I'm going to be patient today, even though I know I'm going to be in situations that aren't going to help me. Be patient. It's a predetermining. And John lets us know, yeah, shepherds, wise men, it's all awesome, unbelievable. I was there so incredibly to hear the stories of Mary. When Mary tells a story, I'm just enamored by this. But here's what you need to know. When Jesus came, there was light, and that light is life, and it's the life that can live in you. And you're called to be the light in your family, in your workplace, in your interactions. So today, we're going to allow you again to pray like we always do. And like if some Sunday we like forget at the end to say like, hey, you can go pray, you can just go pray. You don't need our permission. You don't need our permission to go light a candle and say, Jesus, I need light here. You don't need our permission to go take communion and say, Jesus, I just need you in my life in a tangible, physical way. You don't need permission from us to go write your prayer request on the cross. I am going to give you permission, though. If God has done something in your life, you're free to share that because, that's fun to celebrate with you. It's awesome. But these are your moments and your time as we head to Christmas to be the light. Let me pray with you, and then the band's going to sing. Father, today, our eyes constantly adjust to darkness, and we just assume that it's normal. We normalize our culture all the time, God, and go, well, that's just the way it is. That's just how it's got to be. That's just how things are now. And you start the Christmas story off so different because you go, oh, friends. Don't normalize. Don't rationalize. Remember, Jesus is the light. And it'll get as bright as the amount of light we allow into our hearts. And some of our hearts have some dark places because of some stuff we've done in our past. And you don't want to hold that against us. You want to forgive us and give us new life in your Son, Jesus Christ. So today, for some of us, we need to just accept your forgiveness. Others of us need to live differently. Some of us need to realize that you came to show us the way so that maybe we can find our why. And in these moments, God, that we call ourselves and take a knee and bow down, we just want you to know we love you and that you're the leader of our life. You're our Savior and you're our Lord. So would you help us to reflect this light, to be the light this Christmas season? It's in your name we pray.